So I keep coming back to this moment, the night the last storm, Milton, came, and we were hiding in a walk-in closet that was our safe room that I had cushioned with lots of blankets and comforters and pillows just in case the house exploded. Because as a Cat 5, if it had hit, that's truly what would have happened. And or even a Cat 4. It was only a Cat 3, and the eye passed right over our house, and we walked outside, and it was truly a spiritual, memorable moment. Ever since I was a kid, I was terrified of tornadoes because in the Midwest we had lots of those, and it was scary. And the sirens would go off later in life because when I was young, we didn't have sirens. And it was just super scary. And since I was 5, we had this just terrible fear of tornadoes because a really bad one went through St. Louis, not too far from our home, and a lot of people died. And I remember the television news at the time, as primitive and black and white as it was like looking at dollhouses. Apartment buildings were just sliced in half, and you could see people's dinner plates. I mean, it was quite impactful and traumatic. And yet, I had this incredible fascination all my life about tornadoes, and I always wanted to be in one, like in the middle of one. I just had lots of recurring dreams, especially when I was under stress, about being sucked up by a tornado and being inside one. And of course, about this time, The Wizard of Oz, the movie, was quite popular. So all of those things had a huge impact. But even though I've never been inside a tornado and probably really don't want to be ever, because that would be super destructive because it's a small, concentrated area versus a hurricane. I mean, the eye, I'm not sure what the mileage and the diameter was across, something like, I don't know, 15, 20 miles, maybe. And that's one of the reasons it wasn't terribly destructive because the eye wall was breaking apart as it came on shore with Milton. But, just the stress of 3 hurricanes in 2 months, 2 of them in 2 weeks with Helene before Milton, and that moment, that night, which seemed like forever that we were in the walk-in closet, I kept thinking, this is possibly my last night on the planet. And I talked to other women in particular in our neighborhood, and they all felt the same way, that this might be it. And certainly I patted the walk-in closet like it would be, just preparing for the worst. So what did I think about? And I encourage you to drop in the comments, like, have you ever been in these kinds of moments, and what did you think about? And for me, I was writing this letter to my children about why I divorced from their father. The thing is, they've never asked. And people, oh, let's just be real, therapists, legal mediators that we had, and I have said to the few people I've shared this with that divorce was the divorce from hell, because without getting into specifics, he was a lawyer, so he knew how to game the system. And without going there too much, because I'm really not a fan of airing dirty laundry in public in any form or fashion, but let's just say, as is often the case in these situations, like my father used to say, you never know what goes on behind closed doors. There's always at least 2 sides to a story. And what I was told by the professionals at the time is that, at the magic age of 29, they actually use that age as a number, they will come running to you asking you what happened. Well, that time has long gone. My youngest is in her 30s, and not once have they ever asked why I got divorced from their father. So I was writing this script of what, if I made it out alive, what I would say. And of course, as you might imagine, I've already written this letter, this text, in varying degrees of lengths, from the let's make it a book, because actually the real book I wanted to write instead of my first one, Eat Vegan on $4 a Day, was Legally Kidnapped. Oh, I laugh. But truly, that's what I thought, that's how I felt. And of course, I never wanted to involve my children in any kind of public, anything that would invade their privacy, right? And as a result, I kept very quiet. But of course, as you might imagine, I have written that book. And someone who knew my story rather well, when I first moved to Florida, said, I have a friend who wrote the same book, and the title was something like Prosecuted But Not Guilty. I think that's the name of it. And she was on the lecture circuit like crazy. She became the expert in the field. And my friend told me, and I eventually would meet this friend of his who was the author of this book. It was exactly the same story about parental alienation when it really wasn't a thing, and certainly isn't as much of a thing and legally defined now as it was back then. It just really was not popularized and not so much a discussed issue. But it was a really sad and tragic situation, and for being a television reporter at the time, I thought that I had access to the best resources. And again, without going into the specifics of it, it's a story that I have long wanted to tell my children. So that night before I lost power, I was developing yet another version of the story, about 20 sentences long. And of course, I sent off an email again before we lost internet saying, I just want you to know that I always acted in your best interest. And if you think back, if all of my children collectively put their heads together, they would remember one of the most significant moments that fueled me to say enough is enough. And so I sent off that email. It was just a couple of sentences basically saying, think back, and that's the reason, and many, many more, of course. And just know that I always acted in your best interest and love you. So those were my final thoughts, and not terribly organized because you're in panic mode. You think, as the wind is crashing around you and things are hitting the roof, and you think, what's going to be the next straw? And is this my last breath of air? So I've never really had a situation like that where I thought this was it. Certainly I've had some close calls and brushes with death. As an investigative TV reporter, I have spent some time living in fear that the bad guys were coming after me once they got out of jail, but so far, not so much. So tell me, how you've dealt with these situations. I've seen things about, well, we should be thinking about survivor's guilt, and even though maybe bad things physically didn't happen to us, our homes, our possessions, I have still some feelings about how do we move beyond this, and not wanting to ever wallow in things. It's never been my style. It's just to kind of plug into something else and help people in some form or fashion. So I'd love to hear from you. The garbage is, the leaves, the branches are slowly getting picked up, and you may occasionally see somebody walking back and forth doing the heavy lifting that still, where are we, 2 weeks out from Milton, is still happening. And life is getting back to normal, and even Princess, yes, Princess, I'm talking about you. Yes, that's a good girl. Such a good girl. Yes. Say hello. Say hello. Over here. Yeah. Yeah, we're all just kind of getting back to normal. So it's a process for sure. And I don't even want to think about the discussion that maybe there's another storm brewing. But hopefully this is it. But technically we have until the end of November, about 30 days from now, until all of this is long gone. And the season, hurricane season, is over. Can't come soon enough. All right.